Chapter on The Ledger and the Loophole. The numbers were dying. Azazel watched them bleed across the wall, columns of crimson figures projected onto the dark stone of the trading floor, each one representing a faith stream, a supply line, a battalion's operational budget. The numbers flickered and dimmed as the feeds updated, the glow pulsing in a sickly, irregular rhythm that cast the vaulted chamber in the shifting light of a fire burning down to coals. The trading floor of the Demon Guildhall had been built 3 centuries ago inside a hollowed-out basalt cavern in the deepest stratum of the infernal realm. It was the nerve center of the guild's war economy, a cavernous, suffocating space crammed with ledger banks, projection arrays, and the heavy iron desks of the analysts who tracked every unit of faith capital flowing through the guild's network. The ceiling was low and smoke-blackened, the air thick with the heat of burning tallow candles, the waxy residue of old parchment, and the sharp, metallic tang of copper that bled from the tarnished conduit pipes running along the walls. It was nothing like heaven. That was the point. Heaven was sterile, ordered, infinite. The Guildhall was cramped, hot, and built by beings who had learned to survive inside the margins. Azazel sat at the central desk, a massive slab of black iron bolted to the stone floor, its surface covered with stacked ledgers, rolled contracts, and a scattered litter of copper tallying tokens. He was broad-shouldered, heavy-jawed, with the angular, sharp-edged features that all demons carried, the remnant architecture of a celestial form that had been redesigned for a different purpose. His skin was the deep, burnished bronze of a fallen seraph, but the celestial plating that ran along his forearms and across his collarbone was cracked and dull, the surface webbed with hairline fractures that leaked a faint, dark luminescence. He hadn't fed properly in weeks. None of them had. He was staring at the bottom line. The guild's operational reserve, the accumulated faith capital that funded the war effort, sustained the infernal infrastructure, and kept the dimensional barriers of their realm from collapsing, had fallen below 20%. A month ago, it had been at 60. 3 months before that, it had been at 92. The Angels' soldiers have gotten overwhelming. Azazel didn't know what the Angels called them. The intelligence reports used the designation Golden Infantry, faceless, autonomous combat units sealed in divine armor that fought with a mechanical, relentless efficiency that no organic force could match. They didn't tire. They didn't retreat. They didn't respond to flanking maneuvers or psychological pressure, or any of the asymmetric tactics the Guild had spent centuries perfecting. They simply advanced, absorbed casualties, and kept advancing. They had overrun 3 salient positions in the last quarter alone, cutting through veteran demon battalions with the indifferent precision of a thrashing machine moving through wheat. And there were more of them every week. Azazel picked up a copper token from the desk and turned it between his cracked fingers. The token was stamped with the Guild's operational sigil, a stylized eye inside a broken circle. He pressed his thumb against the sigil, feeling the faint vibration of the faith charge stored inside. It was almost empty. A year ago, this token would have hummed with enough energy to fuel a squad-level operation for a month. Now it felt like holding a dead battery. The heavy iron door at the far end of the trading floor swung open. The sound it made, a deep, groaning scrape of corroded hinges, was loud enough to make the nearest analysts flinch at their desks. Gadriel came through the door like a man, walking out of a fire. His armor was destroyed. The dark, segmented plates that covered his chest and shoulders were scorched and buckled, the surface gouged with the distinctive, clean-edged cuts of celestial weaponry. His left pauldron was missing entirely, exposing the raw, cracked plating of his shoulder beneath. His face was streaked with ash and the dark, viscous fluid that passed for blood in a demon's body. He was carrying a broken lance in his right hand, the shaft snapped clean at the midpoint, the blade end missing. He crossed the trading floor in long, uneven strides, passing between the rows of analyst desks without looking at any of them. He stopped in front of Azazel's iron desk and drove the broken lance into the stone floor, where it stuck, vibrating. "I need reinforcements," Gadriel said. "The 7th Battalion is gone, completely gone. 200 operatives, every one of them dead or scattered. The conscripts hit us at the third salient before dawn. They came through the barrier in column formation, and they did not stop until every defensive position in the sector was overrun. His voice was raw, scraped thin by hours of shouting orders that no one was left to follow. I have 11 soldiers left. 11. If you don't send me fresh bodies within 48 hours, the southern approach falls, and the conscripts will be standing in this room by the end of the month. Azazel set the copper token down on the desk. No, Azazel said. Gadriel's jaw locked. The broken lance vibrated in the stone floor between them. There are no reinforcements, Azazel said. He opened the central ledger on his desk and turned it so Gadriel could see the figures. The 9th, 12th, and 14th battalions were dissolved last week. Their remaining personnel were absorbed into the garrison. The garrison itself is operating at 30% strength. He tapped the bottom line. We are spending capital faster than we can harvest it. Every soldier I send to the front line costs more to sustain than the territory they're defending is worth. Then we're dead, Gadriel said, if we can't hold the salients. If we hold the salients, we die slowly instead of quickly, Azazel said. That's not a strategy. He closed the ledger. I'm pulling you off the front line. The silence that followed was dense enough to feel. The analysts at the nearest desks had stopped working. The crimson numbers on the wall continued their slow, flickering decline. You're pulling me off the line, Gadriel repeated. His voice was very quiet. My soldiers bled out in the dark fighting those golden machines, and you're pulling me off the line. I'm reassigning you, Azazel said. It feels remarkably similar to cowardice, Gadriel remarked. Azazel looked at him. His cracked plating flickered with a dull, amber light, the residual energy of a guild master who had spent 4 centuries building an intelligence network, running covert operations, and outmaneuvering a celestial adversary with 10 times his resources. He was not a man who responded well to what he deemed as cowardice. Sit down, Azazel said. Gadriel didn't move. Gadriel, Azazel said, sit down. I'm about to tell you something that will make you want to break this desk. I need you seated when you hear it. Gadriel pulled the broken lance out of the floor and set it across the desk. He sat in the iron chair opposite Azazel, his destroyed armor grinding against the metal. Azazel reached into the drawer of his desk and pulled out a heavy, iron-bound contract. The binding was ancient, dark iron clasps riveted into black leather, the pages inside made of treated parchment that couldn't be altered, forged, or destroyed. He set it on the desk between them with a weight that made the copper tokens rattle. The holy city of Oakhaven, Azazel said. Central human continent. Population, 46,000. It is currently the highest-yielding angelic faith farm in the human realm. The cathedral at its center generates more concentrated devotional output than any other single source we've ever tracked. Gadriel looked at the contract. That's an angelic stronghold. It's warded, garrisoned, and monitored by inquisitors. You'd need a full assault force to breach it. I don't want to breach it, Azazel said. Breaching it destroys the infrastructure. I want to steal it. He opened the contract and spread the pages across the desk. The text was dense. Operational parameters, target profiles, extraction protocols. Gadriel leaned forward, reading. The High Priest of Oakhaven, Azazel said, is a man named Father Aldrich. He is 61 years old, has served the cathedral for 34 years, and is the single most influential religious authority in the province. His personal devotional output alone accounts for roughly 8% of the city's total faith generation. And his son is dying, Azazel continued. The boy is 14. He has a degenerative condition that human medicine can't treat. He's been declining for 2 years. Father Aldrich has been praying for divine intervention since the diagnosis. The angels won't heal him, Gadriel said. It wasn't a question. The angels won't heal him because a grieving, desperate priest generates more faith than a grateful, relieved one. The boy's illness is an asset to their yield model. As long as the child is dying, the priest prays with a conviction that radiates through the entire congregation. Healing the boy would cost the angels approximately 12% of the city's quarterly output. Gadriel sat back. The iron chair creaked under his weight. "We heal the boy," Azazel said. "We walk into the priest's chambers, we tell him exactly why the angels are letting his son die, and we offer him a transaction. The boy lives. In exchange, Father Aldrich signs a binding contract that transfers his soul and his devotional authority to our ledger. When the priest's faith shifts from the angelic channel to ours, his congregation follows. The entire city's output is redirected overnight." "And the priest?" Gadriel asked. "The priest gets exactly what he asked for," Azazel said. "His son lives, the contract is fulfilled, the terms are honored." He closed the contract. "What happens to his soul afterward is the cost of the transaction. We don't pretend otherwise." "You're sending me to steal a city right under those zealous bastards' noses like it is a walk in the park," Gadriel said. "I'm sending you to liberate a city," Azazel said. "The angel's entire operation depends on the humans never learning how the system works. The priest doesn't know his son's illness is profitable. He doesn't know the angels are choosing to let the boy die. He believes they're testing his faith." Azazel leaned forward. "We don't need to be stronger than the angels, Gadriel. We just need to outsmart them and shake the foundation of their belief system. That's all it takes to flip a city." Gadriel picked up the contract. The iron binding was cold in his hands. The pages were heavy, the text legally binding in every realm, human, celestial, and infernal. Once signed, it couldn't be broken. "How many in my squad?" Gadriel asked. "2, Tamiel for surveillance and Barakiel for protection. Small team, fast insertion, minimal registered signature. The Inquisitors are scanning for large-scale incursions. 3 operatives in human disguise won't register." "And if the priest refuses?" Azazel looked at him. "The priest has been watching his son die for 2 years while his gods do nothing. He won't refuse." Gadriel stood. He picked up the broken lance from the desk and tucked it under his arm. He held the contract against his chest with his free hand. "If this doesn't work," Gadriel said, "we won't have a guildhall to come back to." "If this doesn't work," Azazel said, "we won't need one." Gadriel walked across the trading floor toward the transit portal at the far end of the chamber, a ragged, flickering tier in the dimensional fabric that opened onto the intermediary space between realms. The crimson light of the ledger projections played across his destroyed armor as he passed between the rows of silent analysts. He stepped through the portal. The tier sealed behind him with a wet, hissing sound, and the trading floor was quiet again except for the slow, rhythmic flicker of the dying numbers on the wall. "Welcome to the portal library. Step through and let the magic begin." Make sure to like, subscribe, and comment if you'd love more stories or have a request. We have a Patreon where you can support the story production directly or to follow for free and stay up to date with new story drafts notifications. The link will be included in the description below. New videos are uploaded on YouTube every Monday. Celestial War Series, The Currency of Obsession, an epic fantasy story. Chapter 2, The Ground Game. The rain in Oakhaven tasted like incense. Gadriel crouched in the narrow gap between a tanner's workshop and a stone retaining wall, the cold water running down the back of his borrowed human neck and pooling in the collar of his borrowed human coat. The illusion was tight, compressed against his true form like a suit 2 sizes too small, the false skin pressing against the ridged plating of his forearms until his claws ached inside the smooth, pink fingers. Every breath drew the cloying, heavy sweetness of church frankincense deeper into lungs that weren't designed for it. The Cathedral of the Divine Light dominated the city. It rose from the center of Oakhaven in a tower of white limestone and iron-framed glass, its spire piercing the low clouds, its foundations radiating a suffocating pressure that Gadriel could feel in the marrow of his false bones. Divinity. The concentrated residue of centuries of organized worship, baked into the stone, saturating the air, making every street within 3 blocks of the cathedral feel like wading through chest-deep water. Tamiel was pressed against the retaining wall beside him, their slight frame folded into the shadow of a rain barrel. They had taken the form of a young dockworker, wiry, forgettable, the kind of face that slid out of memory the moment you stopped concentrating on it. Their actual eyes, hidden behind the brown of the illusion, were scanning the street with the focused efficiency. Barrakiel was the problem. He was crouched at the mouth of the alley, massive even in his human disguise, a thick-necked laborer with scarred hands and a jaw like a shovel blade. His illusion was adequate but strained. The sheer physical mass of his true form pushed against the human proportions, making his shoulders too wide, his hands too heavy, his movements carrying a density that didn't match the body wearing them. He was gripping the hilt of a blade concealed beneath his coat, and his borrowed human face was fixed on the street. A figure emerged from the cathedral's side entrance, tall, gaunt, draped in layered robes of white and gold. An iron censer swung from a chain in his right hand, trailing pale, fragrant smoke that dispersed into the rain. The smoke wasn't decorative, it was a detection medium, a suspension of finely ground celestial mineral that reacted to concentrated ether signatures. Where the smoke touched clean air, it dissipated. Where it touched demonic energy, it would crystallize and spark. The Inquisitor walked along the cathedral wall, swinging the censer in slow, measured arcs. The smoke drifted into the rain, spreading across the wet cobblestones in a thin, crawling layer. Barrakiel's hand tightened on the blade. "Don't," Gadriel whispered. The word was barely a breath. "One strike," Barrakiel said, his voice a low grind. "Cut his throat, put the body in the drainage channel, and we're inside in 40 seconds. And the cathedral's divine wards trigger the moment an Inquisitor's heartbeat stops," Gadriel said. "The angels get a priority alert. They deploy a response team. The city locks down, the population panics, and 46,000 humans start praying for deliverance with the kind of desperate conviction that generates more faith capital in one night than we could steal in a month." He held Barrakiel's gaze through the rain. "We are scalpels, not hammers. Stay down." The Inquisitor's censer swept within 6 feet of the alleyway. The smoke drifted toward them, pale tendrils reaching into the gap between the buildings. Gadriel pressed himself flat against the wet stone, pulling his ether signature inward, compressing it until the energy was a hard, dense knot behind his sternum. The smoke touched the edge of his coat. It curled around the fabric, probed, and dissipated. The Inquisitor walked on. His footsteps faded into the rain. Gadriel exhaled. The compressed energy released, flooding back through his limbs with a tingling, nauseating rush. Tamil's hand was shaking against the retaining wall. The effort of suppressing their signature in close proximity to a detection sweep had cost them something. "The cellar entrance," Gadriel said. "Southeast corner behind the groundskeeper's shed. Tamil, you have the ward frequencies." Tamil produced a thin strip of treated parchment from inside their coat. The parchment was covered in stolen celestial notation, ward bypass codes that Azazel's intelligence network had extracted from a corrupted Inquisitor 6 months ago. The codes were one-time use. If they were wrong, the wards would trigger and everything would end in the alley. "Frequencies confirmed," Tamil said. "The cellar wards cycle every 40 minutes. We have a 19-minute window starting in 3. Barrakiel, rear guard. If anyone approaches the shed, you redirect. No contact, no violence, redirect." Barrakiel released the blade hilt. His borrowed jaw flexed. Then they began to move. The cellar beneath the Cathedral of the Divine Light was cold, damp, and saturated with a residual holiness that made Gadriel's skin crawl beneath the illusion. The stone walls wept with condensation. Iron racks held rows of ceremonial wine bottles, their wax seals stamped with the cathedral's sigil. The air was thick with the smell of must, old wood, and the penetrating, sweet-sharp scent of sanctified oil stored in clay jars along the far wall. They ascended the service staircase in silence, Gadriel first, Tamil 3 steps behind. The stairs were narrow, the stone worn smooth by centuries of servants' feet. The divinity pressure increased with every step, a mounting, suffocating weight that pressed against Gadriel's chest and made his borrowed human heart labor. The door at the top of the staircase was unlocked. Gadriel eased it open. The private chambers of the high priest were smaller than Gadriel expected. A modest room with plastered walls, a writing desk stacked with theological texts, and a narrow bed positioned beneath a window of leaded glass. An oil lamp burned on the desk, casting a warm, unsteady light. Father Aldrich was kneeling beside the bed. He was a tall man made small by grief, his shoulders curved inward, his hands clasped in front of his chest, his head bowed. His robes were the formal white and gold of the cathedral's highest office, but they were creased and stained at the cuffs, and the heavy ceremonial chain around his neck hung at an angle that suggested he'd stopped caring about its placement. The boy was in the bed. 14 years old, his face the color of old wax, his breathing a thin, shallow rasp that barely moved the blankets. His hands lay on top of the covers, fragile, the veins visible through translucent skin. A small clay icon of the divine sat on the bedside table, surrounded by burned-down prayer candles whose wax had pooled and hardened into a thick white crust. The priest was praying. His lips moved without sound, forming words so familiar they had been worn smooth of meaning. He had been saying them for 2 years. Gadriel stepped into the room and let the illusion fall. It came off in pieces, the borrowed skin splitting and peeling back, the false proportions collapsing, the compressed mass of his true form expanding to fill the space. His shadow stretched across the plastered walls, angular and sharp, the ridged plating of his shoulders and forearms catching the lamplight. His eyes, deep amber, slitted, burning with a faint internal heat, fixed on the priest. Father Aldrich jerked backward, his prayer dying in his throat. His hand flew to the ceremonial chain at his neck, gripping the divine sigil hanging from it. A pulse of concentrated holy energy erupted from the sigil, a defensive ward, bright and golden, that expanded outward in a shimmering dome. It was a strong ward, for a human. Gadriel extended one hand, fingers spread, and pressed his palm flat against the golden surface. The ward resisted for approximately 2 seconds. Then it fractured, the golden light splintering into fragments that dissolved into the air like sparks from a dying fire. Father Aldrich stumbled backward until his shoulders hit the wall. His hand was still clutching the sigil, but the metal had gone dark and cold. His eyes were wide, the pupils dilated, the whites showing. He was staring at Gadriel with absolute terror. "I'm not here to hurt you," Gadriel said. His voice in its true register was lower than the illusion allowed, a rasping, resonant baritone that vibrated through the stone walls. "And I'm not here to hurt your son." The priest's chest was heaving. His mouth worked, trying to form words. What are you, the wards?" "Father Aldrich." Gadriel kept his voice steady. He didn't move closer. He kept his hands visible. "Your son has been dying for 2 years. You have prayed every day for divine intervention. You have followed every instruction your faith prescribed. You have done everything right." Aldrich's breathing was ragged. He pressed himself harder against the wall. "I want you to consider something," Gadriel said. "The beings you pray to, the ones who built this cathedral, who installed those wards, who empowered that sigil around your neck, they have the ability to heal your son. They have had that ability since the day he fell ill. The cure is trivial to them, a minor expenditure of the same energy they use to make rain fall on command." The priest's eyes shifted. Something beneath the terror, a flicker of attention, a crack in the wall of panic. "They chose not to," Gadriel said. "Not because your faith is insufficient, not because you are being tested, because a grieving father benefits their end goal more. Your son's illness is profitable to them. Every night you kneel beside this bed and weep, they collect the output. You are not a worshiper, Father. You are a revenue stream." "That's a lie," Aldrich whispered, but his hand had loosened on the sigil. "I have no reason to risk coming here and lying to you," Gadriel said. "I can show you the projections if you'd like. The beings I answer to keep very detailed records of what your gods consider acceptable losses." He paused. "But I didn't come here to convince you of anything. I came here to offer you a choice." He reached into the folds of his true form, the deep, angular plates of his torso where the iron contract was secured, and drew out the document. He held it up so Aldrich could see the iron binding, the dark leather, the dense text. "I can heal your son," Gadriel said. "Right now, before his next breath. The illness will be gone. He will wake up hungry and confused and alive. Aldrich's eyes locked on the contract. His hands were trembling. The cost, Gadriel said, is your soul. Your devotional authority will transfer. The faith of this cathedral and its congregation redirects from the beings who let your son die to the ones who saved him. My soul, Aldrich said. Your soul, Gadriel confirmed. Not your son's, not your congregation's, yours. The terms are explicit, the contract is binding, and I will not pretend the cost is small. He set the contract on the writing desk beside the theological texts. I am offering you exactly what you asked your gods for. The only difference is that I'm honest about the price. The room was quiet except for the boy's shallow breathing and the rain against the leaded glass. Father Aldrich stood against the wall for a long time. His hand was still on the sigil, but he wasn't gripping it anymore. He pushed himself off the wall. He walked to the writing desk, picked up a pen from the inkstand, and opened the iron contract to the signature page. Will it hurt him? Aldrich asked. He wasn't asking about the healing. He was asking about afterward, the world his son would wake up into, the cathedral that would no longer protect them, the God who would no longer answer. He'll be alive, Gadriel said. What happens after that is up to both of you. Father Aldrich signed the contract. The pen bit into the parchment, and the ink bloomed dark and permanent. A bead of blood welled from his fingertip where the celestial binding pricked the skin, the blood seal, the irrevocable mark. The contract ignited, not with fire, with a cold, dense pulse of infernal energy that rushed through the parchment, through the desk, through the floorboards, and down into the foundations of the cathedral itself. The prayer candles on the bedside table extinguished simultaneously. The divine sigil on Aldrich's chain cracked down the center with a sound like breaking glass. In the bed, the boy inhaled. It wasn't a gasp or a dramatic resurrection. It was a breath, a deep, full, clean breath that expanded his chest and filled his lungs and brought color flooding back into his wax-pale face. His eyelids fluttered. His fingers curled against the blankets. He exhaled, inhaled again, and settled into the steady, rhythmic breathing of a healthy child sleeping through the night. Father Aldrich made a sound. It was quiet, not a sob, not a cry, just a small, broken noise that escaped through his teeth before he could stop it. He reached out and pressed his hand against his son's chest, feeling it rise and fall. His eyes were hollow. The pupils were still dilated, but the light behind them, the particular warm illumination that comes from a lifetime of genuine faith, had gone out. His soul was no longer his. The devotional weight of 34 years of service had been transferred, redirected, reassigned. He was a man kneeling beside his healed son with an empty space where his purpose had been. Gadriel picked up the signed contract and secured it inside his plating. He could feel the surge already, a massive, roaring column of diverted faith capital pouring through the infernal channels, draining out of the cathedral's celestial infrastructure and flooding back toward the guild. The cathedral's wards were failing. The divinity pressure that had been crushing his chest since they entered the city was evaporating, the sanctified air going flat and stale. Tamil, Gadriel said quietly, we're done, move to extraction. He turned toward the service door. At the threshold, he paused. Father Aldrich was still kneeling beside the bed, his hand on his son's chest, his face pressed against the blankets. Gadriel stepped through the door and descended into the cellar. The rain was still falling on Oakhaven, but the incense taste was gone. Chapter 3, The Glitch in the Machine. The ledgers ignited. Every projection on the trading floor wall flared simultaneously, the dying crimson figures surging to a blinding, saturated red that painted the vaulted ceiling and turned the smoke-blackened stone the color of fresh blood. The numbers spiked so violently that 3 of the projection arrays overloaded, their copper housings splitting with sharp, metallic pops that sent the nearest analysts diving under their desks. Azazel was on his feet before the surge hit. It came through the floor, through the iron desk, through the tarnished conduit pipes in the walls. A massive, roaring column of diverted faith capital, the entire devotional output of a 46,000-person city, ripped from the angelic channel and redirected into the guild's infrastructure in a single, catastrophic transfer. The energy struck Azazel's cracked plating and forced its way in. The sensation was not euphoric. It was violent. The hairline fractures webbing his forearms sealed with a series of wet, grinding cracks that sounded like knuckles being popped by a hand far too strong. The dull, depleted plating along his collarbone flushed dark, the surface hardening and thickening as the stored energy rebuilt the celestial material from the inside out. His vision sharpened. His breathing deepened. The permanent, grinding exhaustion that had been sitting behind his sternum for weeks lifted, replaced by a dense, humming vitality that made the iron desk vibrate under his palms. The bottom line on the surviving projections stabilized and climbed. The reserve counter ticked past 20, past 30, past 40. Azazel braced his hands on the desk and let the surge run its course. The analysts were emerging from under their stations, staring at the walls. One of them, a junior ledger clerk with ink-stained fingers, let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. The Oakhaven Cathedral, an analyst at the central monitoring station called out, her voice cracking with disbelief. Full devotional transfer confirmed. The angelic faith stream is severed. The city's output is routing through our channels. Azazel exhaled. His healed plating gleamed in the crimson light. For the first time in months, the numbers were moving in the right direction. The short squeeze had worked. Gadriel had walked into the highest-yielding angelic farm in the human realm and flipped the entire city overnight. The angels had just lost more faith capital in a single event than the guild had harvested in the last 2 quarters combined. Azazel allowed himself 3 seconds of satisfaction. He picked up the copper tallying token from his desk and pressed his thumb against the guild's sigil. The vibration was strong, a deep, steady hum that resonated through the metal and into his healed bones. 3 seconds. That was all he got before the vault doors blew inward. The blast hit the trading floor with a concussive force that flipped the iron desks nearest the entrance and sent analysts tumbling across the stone. The heavy iron doors, each one 3 inches thick, reinforced with celestial-grade locking mechanisms, tore free of their hinges and cartwheeled into the chamber, one of them embedding itself in the far wall with a grinding shriek of tortured metal. Through the ruined doorway, golden light poured into the dark, smoke-choked chamber. Not the warm, diffuse gold of celestial illumination. A harsh, concentrated glare that burned the edges of everything it touched and turned the tallow smoke into a haze of bright, swirling particles. The conscript stepped through the breach. It was smaller than Azazel expected. The intelligence reports described the golden infantry as towering, armored juggernauts. This one was human-sized, a figure sealed in polished golden plate armor, featureless, the faceplate smooth and blank. No insignia. No rank, no crest. It moved with a fluid, mechanical precision that looked almost natural until you noticed that the footfalls were perfectly equidistant and the arm's swing was identical on both sides. It carried no weapon. Its gauntlets were empty. The conscript walked into the trading floor without breaking stride. An analyst scrambled to his feet directly in its path, raising his hands in a reflexive, defensive posture. The conscript drove its open palm into his chest. The analyst flew backward 15 feet and hit the stone wall with a sound that ended the question of whether he was still alive. Azazel grabbed the iron lance mounted on the wall behind his desk, a ceremonial weapon, decorative, never intended for combat. It was the closest thing he had. He vaulted the desk and put himself between the conscript and the central ledger bank. The conscript's blank faceplate turned toward him. The 2 points of white light behind the visor locked onto his position with the flat, mechanical tracking of a weapons system acquiring a target. It charged. The speed was wrong. Nothing wearing that much armor should move that fast. The conscript closed the distance in 3 strides, its golden gauntlet driving toward Azazel's chest in a straight-line strike that carried the full momentum of its armored mass. Azazel sidestepped. The gauntlet missed his sternum by an inch, the displaced air ruffling the fabric of his coat. He drove the iron lance into the gap between the conscript's breastplate and pauldron, aiming for the joint where the armor was thinnest. The lance point hit gold and skidded. The celestial steel was harder than iron. The point scored a bright scratch across the surface and glanced off, the impact jarring up through Azazel's arms into his shoulders. The conscript pivoted, no wasted motion, no recovery pause. It pivoted on its forward foot and drove its elbow into Azazel's ribs with a force that cracked two of them and sent him skidding across the stone floor, the iron lance clattering away. Azazel rolled to his feet. His cracked ribs ground against each other, the freshly healed plating already fracturing again under the impact. The conscript was advancing, steady, relentless, that metronomic footfall eating the distance between them. It didn't speak. It didn't roar, taunt, or telegraph. It just came. Azazel pulled energy from his restored reservoir, a heavy, burning draw that flooded his limbs with combat-grade strength. He caught the conscript's next strike on his forearm, the golden gauntlet slamming against his plating with a detonation of sparks. The force drove him back 3 feet. He locked his stance, grabbed the conscript's extended wrist with both hands, and twisted. The conscript's arm didn't break. The celestial steel held, but the torque threw its balance, and for a fraction of a second, the blank faceplate tilted upward, exposing the narrow gap beneath the chin guard. Azazel drove his fist into the gap. His knuckles connected with something behind the golden plate, something that was neither metal nor empty air. The conscript's head snapped back. It staggered. For the first time, its perfect mechanical rhythm broke. Azazel didn't let go. He hooked his foot behind the conscript's ankle, wrenched it off balance, and slammed it onto the stone floor. The golden armor hit the flagstones with a ringing crash that echoed through the ruined trading floor. He dropped his full weight onto the conscript's chest, pinning it, his hands locked around its throat. The conscript thrashed. Its strength was enormous. Azazel could feel the servos of whatever mechanism drove the armor straining against his grip, the golden limbs hammering against the floor with a force that cracked the stone. But the energy from the Oakhaven surge was still flooding his system, and for this one moment he was stronger. He grabbed the iron lance from where it had fallen. He raised it point down over the conscript's faceplate, adjusted his grip, and drove it through the visor. The golden plate split. The lance punched through the polished surface with a shrieking, tearing sound, and the visor cracked open in a jagged line from brow to chin. Azazel had expected to see the face of an angel. He had expected golden light, celestial architecture, the gleaming internal structure of a divine war machine. He had braced himself for the blinding radiance that accompanied every piece of angelic technology he'd ever encountered. The face behind the visor was human. It was gray, translucent, a flickering, hollowed-out shell of luminescence that bore the faintest suggestion of features, a jawline, the curve of a brow, the indentation where eyes should have been. It was a human soul. The soul was screaming, then it grabbed him. The conscript's gauntlet shot up and locked around Azazel's forearm. The grip was crushing. The soul behind the broken visor blazed white. The transmission hit Azazel like a fist to the base of his skull. He saw the spirit realm. He saw the golden hooks dropping from above, massive, curved, inscribed with burning script, plunging into the formless ocean of dormant souls and dragging them screaming toward a breach in the sky. He saw the forges, rows of them. The white fire burning day and night, the chains hauling souls through the flames, the assembly lines of empty golden armor waiting to be filled. He saw the faces, gray and translucent, sealed behind blank faceplates, their screams compressed into the silent, internal prison of the armor, awake and trapped. The transmission lasted less than 2 seconds. It felt like drowning. The conscript's grip released. The white light in the broken visor guttered, flickered, and died. The gauntlet fell to the stone floor with a heavy, final clank. The golden armor went still. Azazel pulled his arm free. His hands were shaking. His cracked ribs were screaming. The residual image of the forges and the hooks and the faces was burning behind his eyes like a brand pressed into wet leather. He looked down at the conscript. The split faceplate was dark. The shell of the human soul was dissolving inside the armor. A fine golden ash drifted from the cracked visor and settled on the flagstones. Azazel stood. The trading floor was destroyed, desks were overturned, projection arrays were shattered, the vault doors embedded in the walls. The analysts were pressed against the far wall, silent, staring at the wreckage. He stared at the golden ash on the floor and processed what the transmission had shown him. The angels weren't just building weapons. They were building an army out of the dead. But the dead were still in there, conscious, trapped, and the one sealed inside this armor had been aware enough to grab his arm and send a message. The angels' weapons were made of people who could be woken up. Azazel sat down on the edge of his overturned desk. He pressed his hand against his cracked ribs, feeling the broken plating grind beneath his palm. The short squeeze had bought the guild weeks, maybe months, but the fundamental equation hadn't changed. The angels had an infinite supply of raw material, and every conscript they built was another undying soldier. The guild couldn't outproduce that. They couldn't outfight it, and they couldn't outlast it. But they could break it from the inside. Azazel picked up the copper tallying token from the floor where it had fallen. He turned it between his fingers, the guild sigil catching the light. I hope you are enjoying this story so far. Stay tuned next week for the finale of this series. Don't forget to like and subscribe and to check out our Patreon page. If you are watching on Patreon, I really appreciate your support. Chapter 4, The Pivot. Gadriel stepped through the transit portal into a room he didn't recognize. The trading floor was destroyed. Golden ash drifted through the air. It caught the remaining light, thin and pale, settling on every surface with a fine, glittering residue. Azazel was sitting on the edge of his overturned desk in the center of the wreckage. His coat was torn at the shoulder. His plating was fractured along the ribs. A copper tallying token sat in his open palm. At his feet, the remains of a golden conscript lay spread across the flagstones, the armor cracked open, the visor split from brow to chin, the interior dark and empty. What happened? Gadriel said. Sit down, Azazel said. Tell me about Oakhaven first. Gadriel remained standing. He pulled the signed contract from inside his plating and set it on the nearest surface that was still upright, a filing cabinet with a dented corner. It's done, Gadriel said. The priest signed, the boy is healed. The cathedral's devotional output transferred to our channels at the moment of signature. The angelic wards collapsed within minutes. Their inquisitor network in the city is blind. He straightened. We can replicate this across cities, every cathedral with a priest who's been praying for something those bastards refuse to deliver. The model works, Azazel. We can starve them. Azazel turned the copper token between his fingers. We can't starve them, Azazel said. I just handed you the largest single faith transfer in the guild's history. The reserve is above 40% for the first time in. And they sent a golden conscript through our front door 3 hours after the transfer hit. Azazel nodded toward the wreckage at his feet. 1 unit. Bypassed every defensive position between the front line and this room. Walked through the vault doors. Killed analyst Xaphan. Put me through the floor before I managed to crack its helmet. The weight of the ruined trading floor settled over Gadriel. 1 unit, Azazel repeated. That's what they sent for a single stolen cathedral. When we take 10, they'll send 100. When we take 20, they'll send 1,000. Then we hit harder. They aren't relying on living prayers anymore. Azazel stood. The cracked ribs made him move carefully. I cracked the visor. There was a human soul inside, conscious, trapped. Every scrap of identity burned out, the raw energy sealed into the armor as a battery. He stepped over the conscript's empty gauntlet. And before it died, it grabbed my arm and showed me everything. They're dredging the afterlife, Gadriel. The angels are processing them into soldiers. Gadriel stood with the signed contract on the cabinet beside him. 2 days ago, it had been the salvation of the guild. If we capture every living city on earth, Azazel said, every cathedral, every temple, every shrine, they will still overwhelm us, because they don't need the living anymore. They have the dead. The trading floor was quiet. The golden ash had mostly settled. "Then what do we do?" Gadriel asked. Azazel walked to the central ledger bank, the only piece of infrastructure still intact. He opened the primary ledger and turned to a page of operational protocols that hadn't been accessed in centuries. "You don't fight a monopoly by competing with it," Azazel said. "You destroy its supply chain." He ran his finger down the faded page. "Their weapon is built on a single assumption, that the souls inside the armor are empty. They burned out the identity, the memory, the self, and they assumed nothing was left." "But the one in this room wasn't empty," Gadriel said. "The one in this room grabbed my arm and screamed." Azazel closed the ledger. "The purification process isn't complete. The souls are suppressed, not destroyed. If one of them can wake up, all of them can." He reached into the reinforced housing of the ledger bank and withdrew a small, angular object wrapped in black cloth. He set it on the ledger and unwrapped it. A rift key, a crystallized shard of compressed dimensional energy, roughly the size of a human finger, its surface covered in dense, spiraling script that pulsed with a faint, unstable light. The Guild had manufactured exactly 4 of them over the course of the war. They were illegal under every treaty ever signed. Azazel set the rift key on the ledger in front of Gadriel. "You're not going back to the human realm," Azazel said. "The cathedral operation is finished. The faith war is finished. We're not going to win by stealing prayers or flipping cities." The unstable light pulsed against Gadriel's face. "You are taking your squad into the spirit realm," Azazel said. "You are going to find the human souls waiting in the dormancy fields, the ones the angels haven't hooked yet, and you are going to tell them exactly what happens when the golden chains come down." "You want me to warn them," Gadriel said. "I want you to arm them," Azazel said. "A warned soul resists the hook. A resisting soul disrupts the extraction. A disrupted extraction breaks the forge. And a broken forge means every conscript on every battlefield stops, because the supply chain just found out what it's being used for." He placed his hand flat on the ledger. "We are not fighting a war anymore. We are starting a riot." Gadriel picked up the rift key. It was warm in his hand, the crystallized energy humming against his plating. "How long do I have?" Gadriel asked. "As long as it takes the angels to figure out what we've done," Azazel said. "After that, they'll seal the spirit realm and we never get another chance." Gadriel closed his fist around the key. He picked up the signed Oakhaven contract from the cabinet and set it on Azazel's overturned desk. "Keep this," Gadriel said. "The priest held up his end. Make sure the boy stays healthy." "The contract is binding. The boy lives regardless." "I know. I'm asking you to make sure." Azazel secured the contract inside his plating. Gadriel walked to the far wall where the dimensional fabric was thinnest. He held the rift key against the stone and activated the script. The breach ripped open, jagged, bleeding, nothing like the clean precision of angelic technology. Through the torn opening, the spirit realm stretched in every direction. Gray, vast, silent. Gadriel stepped through. The breach sealed behind him, and the trading floor went quiet. Golden ash settled on the overturned desks and the empty armor on the floor. Azazel sat down and opened the next ledger. Quote of the week: "The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting." Sun Tzu. Thank you for listening to Celestial War Series Part 2. Hope you enjoyed this story. If you want to hear more, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, and check us out on Patreon. New stories are uploaded on Patreon every Friday and on YouTube every Monday.